So Donald held a rally in Wisconsin today, and I need you guys to hear this.
We will ultimately eliminate the federal Department of Education and send education back to Wisconsin and back to the states so that Ron Johnson can run it, okay?
So a couple fun things right off the bat here. Number one, I don't know if Don doesn't know how the government works, but Ron Johnson is a United States Senator. He works for the federal government. And when we talk about stuff getting sent back to the states, Ron Johnson has no oversight in state laws, funding, things like that. Secondly, for those of you who are outside of Wisconsin and might not be familiar with Ron Johnson, you got to know that, he hates kids. Exhibit A.
I've never really felt it was society's responsibility to take care of other people's children.
And unfortunately, other people's children also means his own children's children, because on his website, Just the Truth, Ron talks about how he fully supports IVF because his daughter used it to have his grandchildren. Unfortunately, this summer, he voted against the right to IVF. Okay, but getting back on topic to the Department of Education and defunding it. Sorry, I couldn't help myself there. I'm sure you're all shocked to know that Project 2025, the agenda that Trump knows nothing about, one of their core pillars is to completely defund the Department of Education. It is worth noting that this isn't a new thing for Trump or even Republicans in general. They want to be able to have a voucher system and school choice and to not have to follow federal guidelines. Okay, so what would defunding the Department of Education actually do? For K-12, we just talked about, school vouchers. It's always cloaked in, choice, it's such a great thing. Well, for schools, it's not. What it ends up doing is allowing schools to bypass federal regulations that are set in there for civil rights regulations, not being able to discriminate against somebody who's LGBTQ, not having to have ADA accessibility for students in wheelchair. Many experts say that it will further segregation in schools again. So specifically, Project 2025 calls for the Title I program, which is for low-income students and families, to be transferred to the Department of Health and Human Services and then be sunsetted over 10 years. At the end of the day, for K-12 schools, the federal government only funds about 14% anyways. A lot of it comes from state and local funding. However, almost all of those funds that would be cut harm students that are already disadvantaged. So from a higher education perspective, it's more of the same. First thing it would affect is Pell Grants, which is the #1 way we help low-income students go to college. I'm sure you're also shocked to know that student loans come from the Department of Education, so those would most certainly be affected, including loan forgiveness for public servants, so teachers, police officers, people who work in nonprofits. So I'll end on this. Again, this isn't necessarily new. Republicans have been trying to do it since Reagan, but it's worth noting that it needs to go through Congress to pass. And it has never passed because it's not popular. It is an extreme policy that most experts agree would be a disaster to shift away from and try to implement without students falling through the cracks.